Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room episode number 197. We are just 3 episodes away from hitting the 200 mark for November 11th, 2020. Happy Veterans Day to all of you, including to Dr. Fryer. This is EdTech. I've already said what episode it is. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the fabulous University of Montana campus here in very snowy Missoula, Montana. And joining me this evening, as always, good evening, Dr. Wes Fryer.
Good evening, Jason. I am joining you from not snowy central Oklahoma, where we had a earliest ice storm ever that I think anybody remembers, but back into our 60s and 70s, and we had some folks in shorts today. It was kind of crazy. So I am the technology innovation. What am I? I haven't said this in a while. I teach Spanish, man. I'm the technology integration and innovation specialist at the Cassidy School, and I am teaching Spanish along with media literacy with 5th and 6th graders. And hello, Peggy George. We're glad you're back. And Jason, you took the week off allegedly last week. How did that go? And did you have much offline time? That's what I want to know.
Well, so yeah, I did take last week off from work, and then we decided that we would also extend that to the podcast so I could try to stay offline. I will say that my master plan of kind of, staying connected through Tuesday and then backing off from a connection to the world didn't work out quite as planned, but I didn't spend a ton of time online. I generally stayed away from work. I did get some reading in. I'm kind of working on a side project right now that's kind of educationally related that I was able to do what I do or love to do, which is to read about history. So I'm currently working on a little something that has to do with teaching of the Prohibition in the 1920s and 30s. And so I read some great works there last week. But unfortunately, national news did force me to kind of ping back in through about Saturday or so. You could probably do the math about what I was kind of keeping an eye on as things played out. But I wouldn't quite say I'm tan. But I am rested a little bit and certainly was ready to get back into work in my day job. But as we've mentioned a couple times in the podcast, I'm still not cutting my hair. I'm in my wisely self-imposed quarantine here in Missoula. COVID's kind of raging in Montana right now. So as I am an immunely suppressed American, I have been, very careful not to leave my home office. But it's all good, and I'm thrilled to be back.
I got to know, though, define snowy Montana. Are we talking 3 inches?
It dumped a foot here last night.
Wow.
So it was more. There was 2.5 feet in Great Falls, which was a record in 48 hours. We didn't get that a couple days ago, but then last night, I have a lot of friends and colleagues in northern Idaho, Coeur d'Alene in particular, and I was talking to a colleague there yesterday, and he had let me know that they had been experiencing a lot of snow dump, and then at about 10 o'clock last night, my phone said that there was a snow warning, and I woke up this morning to, I'd say, about a foot of snow on the ground. So
wow.
Yep.
Well, your audio is coming through great. It is you're a little bit fuzzy for me on the video, but that could be me. So I'm actually going to open up the old Google Wi-Fi app and give myself priority here on my device. So we'll see if that affects it. And Peggy, maybe you can let us know in the chat how that is. Well, Jason, it's been a couple weeks. Maybe we've forgotten. What is it that we do on this show?
Well, the EdTech Situation Room is a mostly once a week podcast where we go through the current topics in technology and kind of shoot them through an education lens to try to maybe make some sense of all the many things going on in the world. And this week, our topics will include they always include education. Election 2020. There's some Apple news I heard that we probably want to talk about. A lot of interesting things that happened actually today in Google world. We have some maker stuff to talk about, a little bit of our tech correction topic, AI, and then of course we'll end this week with our geeks of the week and stuff that we've been geeking out over in the past couple of days. So, Dr. Fryer, where should we start tonight?
Oh gosh. So we're gonna need to say a few things about this little event that happened last week on Tuesday, I think, which is kind of crazy. Um, and we are not a political show. We say this kind of every time when we touch on issues that connect to the election. I guess I'll start with an EdSurge article that was on November 7th, and it just said that the U.S. election underscores the need for teaching news literacy in our schools. I had the opportunity this last weekend. Actually, it was on Friday. We had a conference day, and that was well timed because the Northeast Council for Media Literacy had a lovely online conference with about 300 folks, and there's no way I would have been going to that in person if it wasn't for COVID. International audience, it was fantastic. We used the app WOVA, which I have used before at OU, that they have an interactive learning institute, which they've had each year. I don't know if it'll happen again. I think usually in February. But anyway, just fantastic. And, that conference is all about media literacy. This article is underscoring the need for news literacy. In some of the sessions, folks were talking about, how fantastic journalism can be, developing the skills of journalism, where students are vetting sources and they're needing to establish credibility and trust. I don't think we're going to be media literacy educating ourselves out of the proverbial hole that we've sort of dug ourselves in. But I do think it is important. And, this article is an editorial, of course, by Liz Ramos, but it is kind of an op-ed. But it is super important to help students be able to identify misinformation. What I'll say, and this is also just coming off of some Facebook interactions on my page lately, and then we had a great discussion last night actually with our parents about The Social Dilemma, that documentary that aired in September on Netflix. We literally have people living in different worlds of facts, like different realities, and it can be really apparent, and was recently for me on Facebook. So yes, media literacy is important, but there are some deeper, underlying issues as well that, are not going to really be fixed, quote unquote, with media literacy education. But in that article, I think it was the one where they were talking about, there's some mandates, there's some proposed bills and things like that to try to require media literacy. I'll share one other one and then kick it to you. This is an Education Week article by Madeline Will on November 6th. What teachers should do when QAnon conspiracy theories come to class. One of the realities is that controversial topics can be really hard to address. I don't know that we used the article 2 weeks ago, or maybe we did mention it, but there's some cases now that have been pretty well documented of just teachers having a Black Lives Matter sign up in their classroom and bringing up a topic, and then some parents having some real backlash against them. So it is a tough time to talk about controversial issues. We certainly need to keep in mind what is developmentally appropriate for kids. This article in Education Week actually includes some interesting surveys, which happened right before November. It was at the end of October, showing that a lot of teachers are just not aware of what QAnon is. And that was like 35% of folks that were responding to it. And it's just really challenging to address these kinds of issues. So I'm going to, again, because we just started our next trimester, have a conspiracy theory unit with my sixth graders, but we're going to be focusing on the Apollo moon landing. And one of the things that I think is really good and I think it's that Education Week article is we shouldn't just encourage kids to weigh the evidence. We shouldn't pretend that every conspiracy theory that's out there is deserving of legitimate academic comparisons and research, because in the case of QAnon specifically, and it's become this sort of gargantuan, massive conspiracy theory, it's the core piece of it, when you say it out loud, is just crazy. It absolutely is a Fruit Loop conspiracy theory, and so I'm using that term, which is not an official term, Fruit Loop conspiracy theory, to talk about some things. There are real conspiracy theories, there's all kinds of stuff out there, but it certainly is important that if we're going to prepare kids for literacy in the world, that we're going to talk to them about how they are verifying, sources of information and how do they decide who to trust. So thankfully, I think, Dr. Neiffer, last week you were able to resolve all the mis and disinformation issues facing us in education. So what when you went up on the mountain, what did you receive? What did you receive on the, was it an e-ink tablet, or what kind of tablets did you receive the message on?
I'd love a good e-ink tablet, but so what I would say is that, and as I mentioned in the past, I was really leery 20 years ago with this notion that, and I have to say, I am still philosophically a content teacher from the standpoint of I am a history teacher and government teacher by training. That's what I spent my 14 years in the classroom doing. And I would tell you that there is a narrative that belongs in that classroom, whereas I've pushed back on the notions that we don't need to teach content in history and government classrooms because the students have access to unlimited content. I don't believe that to be true. I didn't believe that to be true 20 years ago. I don't believe that to be true today, in part because the internet itself is an unreliable narrator of the truth. Right now, there's something to be said about that there are varying views of history, that there are varying sources of history, but I do believe that a running narrative inside of a classroom is an important piece of information that needs to be shared with students. And so when I hear about teachers saying things like, we just need to teach kids to be good information consumers, and then it's all good, that presumes the internet's not broken. And I do believe the internet is vastly broken in that one of the reasons why I personally love the internet is because it gives everyone a microphone. But one of the things that terrifies me about the internet is that it gives everyone a microphone. And so we need to start thinking about how can we balance back and forth? Like we don't go to science classrooms and say, you don't need to teach science content. Just send them out to the internet and teach them how to be good consumers of science content. I think the same should be true in social studies and other content areas as well, because there is some things that are probably not very disputable in the historical narrative and in the government narrative. Now, that said, I will tell you that when I was a teacher of conspiracy theories, I taught the Apollo moon landing conspiracy theory. I taught the JFK assassination conspiracy theory. I taught things that were less conspiracy theories, but controversial history. For example, Thomas Jefferson's interactions with Sally Hemings was something we talked about quite a bit. It was mostly accepted history, but there was some controversy there in regards to the narrative and trusting historical sources. But that's the way we need to approach these things. We have to balance, I think, the teaching of how to evaluate sources and also how to look at a variety of sources with a story, right? Or a running narrative of how this all fits together. And there are things that are just plainly not true, right? That the preponderance of historical evidence says that X, Y, and Z is true or is not true. And I think that narrative belongs in a classroom. But the problem we're running into right now is that I'm particularly talking about social studies classrooms, is that things that really 25 years ago weren't considered to be controversial are suddenly getting, I think, a lot of pushback from parents to believe that schools are trying to indoctrinate their kiddos in order to do X. I do not believe that schools are indoctrinating kids in history classes, but this notion of somehow talking about the shortcomings of our nation's long history is teaching people to dislike our history. I strongly push back against that notion. What I love about being an American is that we can own up to our mistakes and truly keep our mission of becoming a more perfect union, right? Those three words to me define the American experience, that we're always striving for a more perfect union. That means that we have to take some time to evaluate what's going on, whether it's 200 years ago or yesterday, and then strive to be better, right? And in fact, if anything else, more perfect is the way I try to approach my life too, that I have plenty of shortcomings, but tomorrow I hope to be a little better than I was today. Now, when you say, Wes, that and I was reading through part of this QAnon conspiracy article, what's dangerous, maybe that's not the right word, what's concerning, what's challenging about this notion is I do think that no matter what you tell some folks, no matter what truth you speak or what sources you bring in, or whether you're asking folks to be critical about where they're getting their information, we are in a kind of a strange era of American history where low information sources are starting to dominate a lot of people's news diets. And I don't know how we get away from that. And I want to talk about, the problem is all this stuff starts to meld together, right? But we oftentimes talk about the tech correction in our podcast. This is a notion that we're starting to try to figure out where tech fits now that we know that the picture is not entirely rosy. But I want to kind of insert another article in here for a second. This is from the New York Times today. And this is about something that's been going on over the last a couple of months, but it's fact-checked on Facebook and Twitter. Conservatives are switching their apps. And it's talking about, in particular, Parler, which is a new, I want to call it a Twitter alternative, but I don't think that's a fair, it kind of looks like Twitter. In fact, I got on Parler today. That's the reason why I'm mentioning this. I had today off for Veterans Day, and so I spent part of the day kind of playing around on the internet. So I'm on Parler. And it advertises itself as the free speech alternative to social media, right? Because your free speech is being minimized when you go on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram is the claim of Parler advocates, and you won't have your views squashed on Parler. So the thing that's interesting to me about this is that I think this what proves so challenging about teaching in 2020, because if we do find that social media or web search or anyone steps in and tries to be an arbiter of information, right? Twitter has been slapping warnings on President Trump's tweets about the election. Facebook has been adding interpretive information to various posts and shutting down conspiracy theory groups. Twitter has been pushing out news links. They stopped advertising, or all the major players stopped advertising in the days. I think in some cases those ads are still blocked or heavily regulated by the places. What people are doing is just going and finding other places to connect with others that believe whether their views are mainstream or not. And this highlights the challenge, I think, of our unlimited information society, is that it's not hard to start an alternative app. And my guess is that Parler doesn't look like it's that complex of a website. In fact, I'll be honest, you could probably go on any sort of freelance a website, hire some coders for well under $5,000 that could put up probably not a totally secure website, but at least an alternative that looks kind of Facebook-y, Twitter-y in its nature. And you can host whoever you like to connect whoever you like. And so I think this is a moving target for teachers. I think this is an incredible challenge in 2020, and it will continue to be a challenge. We've talked about in the past whether government regulation is the answer here. It may be, but what Parler suggests to me is that the self-regulation of these technologies is probably not going to do it, because if Twitter starts labeling things that are, and if this is controversial, I guess it's controversial, if Twitter's labeling things that are clearly countered in the mainstream news narrative as not factual, or at least challenged in its notion, and that's such a damning thing that people want to move to a Twitter-like atmosphere, it's going to be rough out there. And I think that we have a lot more fighting to do and a lot more thinking and innovating to do before this is resolved.
Obviously, we could spend the whole show talking about this. I have a couple thoughts and another article.
We almost just did. So
I know we want to get to Apple. And this Google stuff. I didn't even get to see that today. So I'll assure y'all, we're not gonna talk about this the entire time. But I think that this is like, as we, Jason and I get together almost every week and we look at this crystal ball and read these articles and put these dots together. It seems like with the 5G build out of infrastructure that we may be at a very big I'm trying to think of a different word besides turning point, inflection point in the global infrastructure of the internet, because we really are kind of the West versus China in terms of that technology. And I think it remains to be seen how much that's going to affect the interoperability of the internet and some of the basic core technology standards that that have undergirded the internet and made it what it is today. Similarly, I wonder how much we're going to, if we will become fractured also, in terms of social media. One of the things that makes these platforms so toxically, to have such toxic potential in terms of misinformation and disinformation, or information pollution, which I like that term a lot, is the fact that so many of us are on the same platform and we're not fractured, and we're looking, at the same things. So I'll throw one other article in there, and this is one from from NPR, and it's from November 8th. It's called "The Next 2020 Election Fight: Convincing Trump Supporters That He Lost." And this is by Miles Parks. And I'm going to read a quotation from this. And before I do, this is kind of like saying, I told you so, because we've been talking about the tech correction and elections and disinformation, and reading some sources that say we didn't see anything yet in 2016 compared to what's coming. And so this is the quotation, which is pretty sobering, from the article. This is from Alex Stamos, who is director of the Stanford Internet Observatory and was formerly Facebook's chief security officer. He said, quote, and this is talking about what's coming out of current White House of the United States and from a lot of Republican leaders, quote, "This is the most intense online disinformation event in U.S. history, and the pace of what we have found has only accelerated since Election Day." So I am not optimistic about the way in which this is playing out. I want to be, because, I believe in representative government, but I don't think that a lot of folks realize just how dangerous our situation is. I visited Egypt in 2017. They had a coup in which the military overturned actually a democratically elected government of Mohamed Morsi, who since died in government military incarceration. But he was considered to be an extremist, and it was just talking to my friend there, who I got to have dinner with, who was in the U.S. military as a career. He retired, and just seems crazy to think about democracy facing that kind of challenge. And so I think that the roles that technology has played and continues to play in all of this, there's been so many unintended consequences. And again, shout out to the Social Dilemma documentary, because there's a whole lot of things that documentary points to, but some of it are these systemic issues with the ways in which the information landscape operates, the incentives that are there, and the ways in which the folks are operating, without guardrails and without regulation. And so these are going to be things that aren't going to be resolved in the next few weeks, and it's going to continue to be challenging. So do you think we should move on perhaps to some Apple news?
Yeah,
or Google news?
This will be, in fact, maybe we should just save this until the last 10 minutes anyways, but I'm much more excited to talk about the two sets of news. So let's start with Apple. Obviously, big event yesterday. The promised release of Apple Silicon Macs was yesterday. So quick summary, there are 3 new models. There's a MacBook Air, there's a MacBook Pro, there's a Mac Mini, and they have these new M1 chips. So I guess I'd start here, Wes. Any overall impressions from what you saw in the Apple event?
Yes, absolutely. I watched the event tonight. It's not that long, actually. It's 48 minutes. I'll say number one, I think this is due to COVID. Like the last few Apple events we've had, not the last 3 in the last 3 weeks, but before COVID, I mean, they're trying to pack so much in, right? Because they've got so many different product lines. And as someone who does love the Mac and, came to Apple a long long time ago in like 1995, probably I got my first Mac, something like that. I'm really glad to see them. I'm inspired to see them giving so much attention and an amplification of their work on Mac OS. I think it's probably a lot less expensive for them. I don't know, maybe not. But hosting these virtual events, I mean, they're doing incredible videos. And so even if you just want to approach this as a student of videography and marketing and the ways in which the top shelf, I mean, certainly one of the top shelf technology companies today is able to market their products, take a look at these Apple videos. But I emerged from seeing it. I mean, this is again not the culmination of Moore's law, but like processing power, being able to take the mobile processor, which is very lightweight in terms of power consumption, and being able to just do incredible things, the integration. And they do such a nice job with visuals and things in their presentations, explaining things that are really complicated that probably most of us are not going to fully grasp, but trying to help us get our heads around it. It is really, really impressive and really, really exciting. Does this mean I need to run out and buy a new Mac? No, I'm going to wait till, I'm up for a refresh, I guess, with my school, or who knows what the future will hold for the Fryers, multiple years down the road. Because I just got a new machine like a couple years ago, and we've been on like a 5-year cycle. So that wouldn't put me up, very soon for that. But I do think about our daughter who has been using a super old MacBook Air. I'm talking about our 11th grader. And I'm thinking, man, that, maybe that Pro or even that Air, that's going to be a hefty machine for her to potentially tote to college here in a year and a half. And I'm confident, take her through 4 years and beyond. Because 8 cores, I mean, this was a dream in servers just a few years ago, and now we're saying everybody's machine can have it. And the battery life, we're talking like 15 hours, 20 hours, depending on what you're doing. I mean, folks, that's more than most of us are awake. And so you're really reaching an amazing point at speed and capability. They mentioned machine learning a lot in the keynote in terms of the neural engine. And so I just, as somebody who definitely loves Apple and uses their products, and I'm kind of the fanboy here on the show. Although I will note, Jason, that I love your background tonight, coming to us from the Apple. What is it called? What do they call that? The UFO. It has a name. It has a name. It has a name. Anyway, it's the new Apple headquarters. But anyway, yeah, I just was super inspired. But this is a transition. They are, making sure that old systems are still running, and it's going to be multi-year. But this was the first time I heard USB 4 mentioned, and I think that's kind of interesting. And anyway, it just pushes the envelope of capabilities and what can be done. So, Jason, I assume you are immediately putting all of the laptops in your home on eBay and going ahead and putting in for a new Pro that'll be shipping to you next week.
That's actually not a terrible idea, because I think I could probably pick one up. So I'm up for refresh at work, and I had previously 4 years ago, had purchased a Surface Book. So that is my work laptop, as a Surface Book. And part of the reason why I wanted to go in that direction was that I wanted to become more versed in Windows 10. So I carry a personal Chromebook around. That's my 85% of the time, and then most of my work stuff is either done on a Chromebox, or then I use that Surface Book. And I will say that for the first time in a very long time, I am pretty tempted by the MacBook Pro 13. So I thought the price was very interesting. I'm not wild about the limitations on RAM. I did see finally that the entry level one, you can pay $200 more for 8 more gigs of RAM to get to 16 gigs of RAM. I still find that the Apple tax for RAM to be completely and utterly ridiculous. But
a little bit like batteries used to be, right? Until they had a big hoopla, the batteries were like ridiculous to just
right, exactly. And that's something that I'm not particularly wild about. But there were so many interesting things about what was announced yesterday that I think that might be what I go for next there. So a couple thoughts about this. The first one is that when you talk about the new product lines, one thing I want to point out is that The Verge reported yesterday that based on a careful look at all of the specs of the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, the biggest differences between the two is really a fan. The MacBook Pro it includes a fan. Now, I want to be careful about that because that sounds like it's being critical. It's really not. It's that they expect MacBook Pro users to be more pro users, right? Power users. The specs are actually remarkably similar between the two platforms. But the reason why the fan is interesting is because, as The Verge points out, that the thermodynamics of the laptop really make a difference. And these M1 chips, the ARM-based Apple Silicon M1 chips, probably are very responsive to cooling. So if you expect to ever tax the MacBook, right? If you're doing video editing, even things like what Wes and I do on Wednesday nights to broadcast out via a web interface, those can be somewhat CPU intensive operations. If you do video conferencing, if you do any kind of content creation. So I'm probably in for a MacBook Pro. That's what I'm going to look at. I don't need a huge hard drive. I'm a cloud guy. So the 256 gigabyte drive is more than enough for what I do, since I tend to use a web-based cloud stuff almost exclusively, but super interesting a part of the event. I want to point out one other article. This is Lifehacker reported yesterday that they were looking at kind of what wasn't said at the at the event, the hour-long event. And it's a couple things that are worth mentioning. And a lot of these things have been echoed on Twitter in the last 24 hours too, which means I think there's some leeriness. First, when Apple tells you that it is, 2%, 10%, 100%, 300%, 95,000% faster than X, Y, and Z, that means almost nothing, in part because until these things are released, which they will be next week, right? So that they'll be widely available next week, and they start putting together what this looks like for the typical user, then you really don't know what I'm sure this is going to feel speedy. I know that almost everyone is wildly impressed by the benchmarks in these ARM-based chips, so I am super interested to find out what that looks like. But don't expect this to be a radical shift in speed, right? It probably will feel faster, and feel is a big part of this too, but it will feel faster. It probably will be faster, but don't buy too much into the Apple marketing about it being, infinitely faster than every other Windows alternative. There are some incredibly impressive chips out by AMD right now that probably are competitive price-wise to the Apple chips that are wildly fast, that are going into laptops. So that's one thing to remember. The second thing that Lifehacker makes the claim for, and I think this is a pretty important piece, is that even though the prices didn't drop on the Apple Silicon Macs, these new M1 chip Macs, you probably shouldn't buy an Intel Mac at this point. If you're buying a new Mac, even though the 16-inch Mac is still only Intel, and obviously the Mac Pro, the desktop machine is still going to be Apple, at least for the foreseeable future, along with iMacs. If you have an option to buy the new Apple Mac, buy the Apple M1 Mac as opposed to an Intel Mac, because that's where all of the attention is going to go for Apple's development. And the one last thing I would also mention, and I'm not going to have to make this decision probably until February or March, but generally speaking, there is a lot of unknowns about how the speed will feel for traditional applications on the platform, right? I did put an article in that the current Microsoft Office beta for Mac is Apple Silicon compatible, so they're working towards having those kinds of productivity apps on there. But remember, for at least the foreseeable future, most productivity apps, certainly all entertainment apps, will have been written for the Intel Mac. Now, they have a very clever way of converting that on the fly. You don't have to worry about that. Remember, Apple's been through a transition of platforms before. This is not their first time doing it. But remember, anytime you are converting on the fly like that, it's going to slow things down a little bit. So until everything is kind of native to the new M1 chips, then, we'll have to see what that looks like. But 16 to 20 hours of battery life, unreal. The fact that you can get these beautiful new displays, they call them P3 wide color displays, looks super awesome. All these new integrated pieces into the M1 chip itself, including more efficient networking, more efficient artificial intelligence processing, super awesome. And I hear the MacBook Pro with a fan. You don't hear the fan. It's a noiseless fan that's part of that process. So really interesting stuff in yesterday's Apple presentation.
I was just looking at our local Apple store at Penn Square. I'll be curious. They're open for appointments. You can make a Genius Bar appointment, and you can, pick up a device if you're going to be buying something. They had actually shut down, our location along with a bunch of others because of COVID at one point. This whole thing about immediately on, just like the phone, just like the iPad, and that, that's going to feel different. And so, yeah, I'm eager to see. And I just, I'm Apple's heart. Their core has been the Mac from the beginning, right? The iPod and iTunes, have skyrocketed, and then the iPhone and now services are increasing. So I think it's overall good news. That article that you did mention, I put into the chat from Lifehacker. It's the chassis and the design is pretty much the same. They just kind of slapped the M1 processor into it. But that is a big deal, and this is also an evolutionary step forward. So it just depends. Peggy's up. It sounds like to get a new machine, and depending on how old your machine is, I'll tell you what, when our daughter, it's kind of like, what was our son, he purchased a car. He bought a Subaru last weekend, and he's been sporting the 2002 Toyota Highlander that our family's had. That's what he's been driving. So, when you get a car that's 2020 technology, 18 years newer than your old one, just depends on what you're driving today. But I think, battery life and capability. I love my MacBook Pro. It is, really a phenomenal computer. So yeah, unless you're doing hardcore video editing and some serious compression work that just really taxes your processor, I think the Air is going to be fine for you. And I definitely concur with what you're saying, Jason. I don't see any reason to buy an Intel Mac at this point. You're really not going to be leaving any software behind, and you're really just getting the old technology. And all of your iPhone apps are going to run on the new M1 chip. So hey, that's kind of cool too.
Right, absolutely. And I want to point out two other quick things here that I think are interesting. You just mentioned this a moment ago, but The Verge had a kind of a detailed explanation of this, and I can summarize it. It's about that the M1 Max emphasize continuity over complexity, and that's a decision Apple makes, right? But one thing I would be very interested in is in the same way that the iPad Pro has brought a kind of a new generation of designs, right? It's still a flat tablet, right? It's pretty hard to get away from that tablet form factor. In the same way, it's also hard to get away from a laptop form factor, right? That Microsoft's been trying with the Surfaces, but the bottom line is the laptop form factor sticks around because people like laptop form factors, right? But I would suggest that in the near future that Apple is going to start to evolve pretty dramatically on the hardware side too, beyond what the internals are. And we might see some really interesting new evolutions on Mac hardware. I would also note, going back to my will I buy, will I not buy as part of my hardware refresh at work, I hate the touch bar. And it almost scared. Well, and I would have bought a Mac a couple of years ago because I like the function keys over the touch bar. I did have a conversation with that and the other Mac person in my life, which is Mike Agustinelli, my partner in crime at work. And he said, Neiffer, here's the problem. You're probably the biggest keyboard shortcut guy I know, right? And he said that everyone talks about that keyboard shortcut people really like the touch bar. Now, I can get away from the touch bar by going with the Air, although I think I want the Pro because the Air does not have touch bar. It's got the traditional function keys. And that's a decision I'll have to continue to ruminate over in the next couple of months. And then, go ahead.
The touch bar is not a big deal. When I first got it, I was kind of like, but it's kind of cool. I mean, it pops up really mostly when I need it, and if I want to, I can change it. And it hasn't gotten in my way. I don't know that it hasn't transformed my computing experience, but anyway, it'll be interesting if you end up getting one to see what your opinion, how that shifts as if you end up using it as a daily driver.
And the other thing that's also interesting to me is that I have listened to, and I'm almost certain this was a Mac Break Weekly episode, months, maybe even years ago, that talked about that there are so many third-party apps that you can do that can really do some cool things with the touch bar, right? Adding a lot more custom things, and that's kind of who I am, actually. My Chrome browser is really tricked out. I'm very particular about how I like that set up because I'm very productive with that, and maybe the same thing applies. And then
one other thought for Peggy. Peggy's shopping to replace a 2013 iMac. The Mac Mini that got refreshed. I mean, it's still like, I think it's $700, maybe $699, which I would love to be seeing that less. But I mean, as large and inexpensive as you can get displays today,
yep.
If you don't need to be portable, I would look at what a very nice 27-inch, 32-inch, 4K, high res. I mean, maybe 1080. It's probably not good enough. You're probably going to want higher than that in terms of the graphics card. But that would, right now I'm working on a 27-inch iMac that's kind of old. I love the screen. It's amazing. But if it's going to be my own pocket, I mean, you compare to the, price wise, you're going to be able to get a much larger screen and drive that really well with a Mac Mini than, if you're going to go full iMac. So
right.
if you don't need portability, I'd say look at that as a possibility.
And one of the ways to hedge your bet is you can use, if you are using a 2013 iMac, you can use that in monitor mode, right? You can actually turn that into a monitor, buy the Mac Mini for now, and use that to essentially upgrade the internals on it. And then when you're ready to upgrade to 4K, and I have to say, I upgraded to 4K at home about 6 or so weeks ago. It was a birthday present to myself. This is not even a nice 4K monitor. It's just it's a decently reviewed LG 4K monitor. It's 32 inches, super great. 4K is amazing, and it looks so, because Mike at work has a 5K iMac, and it looks beautiful.
Wow, that's good advice. Well, I would just also on that, I would say check in terms of your connections, because depending upon how old that iMac is, it may be fine as far as Thunderbolt, but it does depend. So just make sure that you are going to have the right connection, and that it'll be able to drive it. But I've definitely done that. We've got a teacher at school who does that, and it's a phenomenal way to utilize another monitor. You don't, if you have the luxury, as sometimes we do at school, that you could at home possibly, of having that machine that you don't need to resell or get rid of.
Yep. And then one other note and this was another thing that happened in the last 24 hours that has, it's kind of, in my mind, breathed some life into Apple. Roku is rolling out AirPlay 2 and HomeKit compatibility for their newest smart TVs and streaming devices. And one of the reasons why I kind of got away from Apple for a while is I felt like that there just wasn't a lot of options if you didn't want to pay the premium price for X, Y, and Z, right? Like the HomePods look super nice, but the problem with them is they're really expensive. And I'm never going to be Steve Jobs sitting in my, a Berkeley apartment in the hardwood floors with my single bed and my hi-fi system with nothing else in the room. Famous photo from the early 1980s for Steve Jobs. I'm going to be a guy that's probably going to have a speaker in every room and wants to throw something up on my TV in my office or in my TV in my living room. And the fact that they're starting to figure out that they need to be a little more compatible with outside systems, that's a real sign of life for me inside of Apple itself. And everything they've announced in the last week has been, I have to say, pretty impressive to me. Now, does that mean I'm going to become iPhone guy and the Apple Watch, which I hugely tempted in? Maybe. I will tell you, my Pixel 3a died a couple weeks ago in a freak accident. And it's so bizarre, I'm not going to even mention what happened to it. But so I am back to I have a Motorola phone that's a year old. That's just fine. It's one of their low end phones, but it's fine enough for now. I think I might be in the market for a new phone at some point. And I know Mike did buy the iPhone 12 Pro, the high end iPhone 12. So he was up for an upgrade. So he's going that direction. We'll see. Kind of tempting, but the will he, won't he, which I'm sure is not the kind of like drama that people are turning in for. But that's something.
They're here for the geek drama, Jason. Make no mistake.
So we'll see. But again, very impressed. And we'll have to see.
Well, I want to get to the Google news, but maybe we'll hit another one before that. I put this one under miscellaneous. This is from NBC. It's news, but it's an op-ed, which, by the way, that's an important thing. Even as we talk with students, like, oh, it's NBC News. There's a difference between the opinion pieces and the newsroom. The title is Remote testing monitored by AI is failing the students forced to undergo it. This is from Shia Swauger, who's a librarian. This is from November 7th. We've talked about this on the show before. Test proctoring software has been utilized extensively in our COVID era, not only by colleges, but also by many high school students and high school teachers. But some of that proctoring, penalizes students for trying to do things like get up to go to the bathroom, reading questions out loud. It can really increase anxiety, invade privacy. The College Board reports has abandoned plans to use proctoring software for its software in an upcoming exam because of technology barriers that it creates. But this is a big controversy and a big issue. The article reports that students at dozens of universities are petitioning to ban proctoring software. And I just say, as a current classroom teacher, we got to think about assessment. We got to think about how it is that we try and measure what kinds of things are sticking in the brains of our students and what kinds of skills are they having. And certainly when you have large class sizes, that, makes it much more challenging when it comes to authentic assessment. But, I think this is an important article, and I think that's an important issue as we continue to move forward in our COVID era.
Very much so. And, I think I mentioned that I am keeping a large notebook at my desk. This is my post-COVID discussion notebook, which is about halfway full now. It's a composition notebook that I've been writing things down in. One of the things I keep going back to is that I didn't really like, especially early on when teachers were so stressed, the people that were starting to beat the drum about how education is this or that. But now that we're finding our stride here, I think, and that, we don't quite see an end to this yet, but, we're getting a better sense that there's going to be some kind of light at the end of this tunnel. I agree. That's one of the things we absolutely need to have a conversation about.
Awesome. Hey, tell us about Google. What's up?
Okay, well, something really interesting happened today, and it's got some reverberations, and I am starting to think about this maybe in a grander context. The first article that I ran to today was that Google Photos is ending its unlimited free backup next year, citing growing demand for storage. And this comes from the good folks at 9 to 5 Google. And for those of you unaware, Google Photos had a really cool thing where you could put the app on your phone. It would upload all your photographs, not in their original quality, but in a high quality that, frankly, was good enough for photo storage. And it would just store all your photos. And so I personally have photos going back. I was going to actually check this for sure, but I have quite a few photos that go back to, 2013 is looking at the timeline here, that I must have first put this on there. And in fact, looking at these now, these are a lot of photos from my phone. So I don't think these are things that I uploaded from elsewhere. But that notion of that notion of unlimited phone or photo storage meant this was my go-to app. And in fact, I recommend it to everyone. Google Photos is an app that even if you're not a Googleite should be absolutely on your phone. So that's gone now. And now it will ping from your storage, basically. You get 15 gigs for free, and then you can buy, I think the product keeps changing its name. I think it's Google One is the name of the product where you can buy storage. But the idea here is that the unlimited storage will be going away. So that then inspired a couple other articles that were related to this. Pixel 5 and below phones, which have always had free unlimited storage for those devices. Anything you upload from one of those phones, you get it in whatever the original quality is. So it doesn't even scale back quality. That will continue forever on Pixel 5s and older, but no commitment from Google today about whether or not future Pixel phones will involve that. But then also Google Sheets, Google Slides, and Google Docs will also now start counting towards your storage cap. And that all very interesting decisions from this standpoint. One of the reasons why I assumed Google was going in that direction was that storage compared to 15, 20 years ago is relatively inexpensive. And in fact, unlimited is really where more people are going, right? The availability of cloud-based storage. So whether you're talking about AWS or the Microsoft's various storage products like Azure, or Google has a huge cloud storage. Like, storage is dirt cheap. And this notion that they're heading in that direction of limiting that and also counting more things against your storage is a fascinating development for this. So I guess I'd start with the question to you, Wes. Does this impact the way you use Google at all if suddenly photos are not stored for free?
Well, it does. I have been, well, I mean, going to have to look at that and see what we subscribe to, right? And for the Apple ecosystem, we pay for the family like 1 terabyte, which we're not, chewing through half of yet. But, and we've got all I still have our photos on, iCloud or whatever on .Mac, whatever the heck you call it on Apple stuff. But then I go ahead and send it over to Google. Google is phenomenal with AI, right? Facial recognition and just being able to find photos and pick stuff out. It's incredible. I mean, I use a Chromecast we do on several of our TVs, and being able to have a dynamic smart photo album that finds the faces of all the members of our family. There's like 3,000 pictures in it, and we're seeing pictures frequently. We're like, oh my gosh, look at that. We hadn't seen it because the AI has found that photo, and we wouldn't be able to get that kind of functionality today with Apple. The connection I make to it, Jason, is what Google has done on the G Suite education enterprise side with the enterprise level accounts. Because until this fall, when you were a Google school, you get everything. It was just all free. And now you have to pay a certain amount per user in order to record your Hangout meets and have other kinds of functionality. That's really one of the biggest things for us, because we have used Google Meets as our primary school-wide video conferencing solution. And it's really, either license that or license Zoom. And it was a lot more affordable. Plus we were just more invested, we are invested in the Google infrastructure. There's other concerns about Zoom and, anyway, that's a longer story. I think that there are folks at Google that are really focused on monetization. And that's what this sounds like to me, because like you said, storage is very cheap, but Google's hooked us, and I think this is part of their plan all along. I'm not saying this as somebody that doesn't love Google. I do. I really enjoy using Google products, and I've drank the Kool-Aid, and hey, I'm a Google certified educator level 1. I got to take my level 2 test here at some point. But I do think that it is a difference in approach, and we're seeing it on multiple fronts. So to me, it just sounds like, corporate monetization, which isn't, shocking, but it does come perhaps as an unfortunate surprise to some of us who have really got used to having everything free from Google.
Well, and it's interesting because that's kind of where, as this has bounced around Twitterdom in the last couple of hours, a lot of outrage at the notion that you pulled us in with free X, Y, and Z. We put in some of our most precious data, right? Photos could be argued to be, the most precious data we generate on our smartphones, and now you're going to charge us to store that. And I think it's a fair criticism, right? I mean, I think that it's complicated. The monetization of this, it also kind of harkens back to some things we've talked about, in a couple weeks past, that one of the big suggestions right now one of the big suggestions that has been tossed around when we talk about the monopolistic accusations against Google is that they might have to split them up into different products. Maybe that's what this ends up being a part of, right? That Google Photos itself becomes a separate product on its own, and then you've got to charge for it, because otherwise, how do you do X, Y, and Z? And again, I think it's all complicated, but it's a little rough, I think.
That's a really good dot to connect, because we've talked for months about the technology correction and where this is going and where this is heading. And I personally hope that our legislators are smarter than to just say, oh, let's just break up Google. That's going to be what we need to do. But we covered it on the show a couple of weeks ago. There is an antitrust court case right now that is up against Google, and one of the outcomes of that could be breaking up Alphabet. And so that is, you just really wonder what the whiteboards in the war rooms at Google, have on them in terms of the forecast that their leadership sees for, politically in the United States, and, whatever directions the political winds happen to blow in the United States. It does appear that we are headed for a technology correction. Thank you, Dr. Neiffer. And so I think it's good. Those are good dots to connect. Again, this is where, like, you hear these articles, you're like, what's up with that? And then you hear different things. You're like, this is interesting, because Google hasn't come out and said, and they may not come out and say, we've made a very large change in our approach to our products, and we're going to be, trying to monetize in multiple ways. And that makes sense, that if they're going to be broken into different pieces, they're going to need to be independently profitable, and they can't, simply use the which, anyway, it's part of the magic and power of Google has been their ability to fund some really, kind of crazy and somewhat outlandish things, because they had such a great, basically printing machine for money. And Microsoft kind of did the same thing with Windows and Office for years, right? They were able to, they could have, I don't think Microsoft has innovated historically nearly as much as Google has, but those are good dots to connect, and, we'll have to see. But it's going to, as Becky said, hopefully the prices on the storage are not going to, go up too high, because, what they want is a subscription. This is what Apple wants. This is what most companies want. They want a regular piece of your budget and my budget every month. Oh, that's all. That's what music streaming is doing. That's what Netflix does. And this is why, to your point, I think in a Geek of the Week a while back, we should be auditing on a personal basis all of those subscriptions, because they can really add up, and you may not even realize, oh my gosh, I've been, bleeding, X amount of dollars to this company or whatever for years. It could be, if you don't do an audit of those things.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we have other stuff, but we are very close to the top of the hour. I will say, coming up next week on the EdTech Situation Room, we will have some additional news about ARM processors that are likely to be rolled out in 2021 on Chromebooks. I also would like to talk a little bit about YouTube Premium, although that will be a Geek of the Week piece for me as well. And we will have some additional information about the complexities of teaching information literacy in 2020. So, Wes, what's your Geek of the Week?
Well, I have three, but they're all videos, and I'll go quick. First one, heard about this one at the Northeast Council for Media Literacy Conference this last weekend. This is Esther, I'm not going to say her name right, probably, Wojcicki. I think she's 80 years old now, but she has written some fantastic books, and her TEDx Berkeley presentation is called The Student as CEO of Their Life and Learning, and it is outstanding, and really, if you watch it, I think will echo a lot of things that many of us are championing in terms of pedagogy and instructional strategies for getting out of the way of students, empowering students, and enabling students to be much more in control of their learning and much more empowered and much less focused on following directions and being that guide on the side that we hear about a lot. Second one is a video from Claire Wardle, and it's called "Can You Outsmart a Troll by Thinking Like One?" And this is a TED Ed video. If you're not familiar with the TED Ed series, it's fantastic. Teachers come up with ideas, and then the professional team at TED Ed makes a very snazzy and professional video. And this is very timely as we talk about disinformation and being able to spot a troll. That's like something we need to be able to do, or outsmarting a troll, I guess. And then the last one is on my watch list. I haven't watched the whole thing yet, but when we talk about the tech correction, the Aspen Institute hosted a panel discussion in June, which was called "Showdown: Free Speech and the Internet." And this goes to the heart of tech correction issues in terms of what will our legislators require the tech platforms to be responsible for the content on their platforms? What are the limits of free speech? Should Twitter and Facebook be moderating and censoring content? I definitely think they should. I think every platform should. If you don't, you're going to have a complete cesspool, and you still have elements of that, no matter how, especially when you're at scale in the way that they are. So those are 3 videos. How about you, Dr. Neiffer?
I would like to share a deal. I feel like I may be the only person on earth that subscribes to YouTube Premium, and more about YouTube Premium next week. But if you are a YouTube Premium customer, Google has announced that they will send you a $100 Stadia Premier Edition bundle, which includes a Chromecast Ultra and a Stadium controller. We've talked about Stadium in the past, not because it has a real education application, but because I think it's a sign of what's to come in regards to computing. Stadia is the streaming service that Google provides that allows you to stream games to a Chromecast and then play them in real time using a controller. $100 value, free for Google Premium users. This is the 3rd or 4th time I've received free hardware from Google because I'm a YouTube Premium subscriber. And I want to talk more about my experience next week about YouTube Premium. I think it's the best $10 I spend every single month. So, Wes, we're at the end of the podcast. Where can people find you on social media?
Well, I am on Twitter at W Fryer. I am sharing probably more on my curriculum site these days, updating lessons there for mainly my media literacy classes at mdtech.cassidy.org. I foolishly claimed that I would be blogging on a daily basis a few weeks ago. Oh my gosh. I think I was, I don't smoke, for the record. I never have, but I was not thinking clearly when I said that. And so anyway, sometimes I will be sharing things on speedofcreativity.org. I actually am due probably to do a post about the social dilemma and things that we learned hosting our parent university, as well as discussing that in other formats. So I heard a rumor that you are still involved with NCCE in a fairly significant way, Dr. Neiffer.
I am. I'm on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I also help out with social media and conference stuff at NCCE, the Northwest Council for Computer Education, www.ncce.org. And probably the best place to find me is Twitter, though. That's where I tend to post information about tech and stuff that I'm reading. But this here is the EdTech Situation Room. We are a once-a-week podcast on Wednesday nights, 8 p.m. Mountain, 9 p.m. Central Time, somewhere in the middle of the night UTC. If you don't want to join us live, although please join Peggy George in our chat room each and every week by watching us live. If you can't, though, feel free to find our podcast wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. You can also go to our website, edtechsr.com, find the links from this week's episode, the show notes, which Wes lovingly puts together each and every week, and then also download tiny MP3 versions of the show if that's your fancy. You can also find us on YouTube and Facebook, where archives of our shows exist. We hope you stay safe out there. Please stay safe and savvy, and we'll see you next time on the EdTech Situation Room. Good night.
Good night, everybody.